the waning light of a late spring evening. The quiet suburb nestled just beyond the bustling heart of San Diego seemed to hold its breath, draped in the soft hues of twilight. Rows of modest homes lined the streets, each porch light flickering to life as families prepared to settle into the calm of their evening routines. The air carried the faint scent of jasmine and freshly cut grass, mingling with the distant hum of freeway traffic and the occasional chirp of crickets awakening to the night. Among these streets walked Jake Reynolds, a man whose silhouette cut a familiar figure to those who knew him well. His broad shoulders and steady gait spoke of years shaped by discipline and resolve, a legacy of a life once spent navigating the unforgiving challenges of the Navy SEALs. Now, in this quieter chapter, he sought solace in the simplicity of home, his footsteps steady beside a sleek black dog whose presence was as commanding as his own. Shadow moved with a silent grace, his coat glistening under the dim street lights as he matched Jake's pace. The bond between the two was palpable, forged through countless trials and unwavering loyalty. Shadow's ears twitched attentively at the slightest sound, his deep, intelligent eyes scanning the familiar surroundings with the vigilance of a protector. Jake's hand rested lightly on the dog's back, a gesture of quiet reassurance, a silent acknowledgement of their unspoken partnership. Their route traced the edges of the neighborhood, a familiar path that meandered past neatly trimmed lawns and the occasional flickering of television screens glowing through curtained windows. The evening air was cool but held the promise of warmth, the kind that settled deep into the bones after a day spent under the sun. As Jake and Shadow moved forward, the neighborhood seemed to exude a fragile peace, the kind that can shatter in an instant, but for now remained unbroken. Yet beneath this surface tranquility, an undercurrent of unease stirred. Jake's years of service had honed instincts that no amount of time away could dull. A distant wail of sirens echoed faintly in the distance, threading through the normal sounds of evening life like a warning. Shadow's ears flattened momentarily, a low growl rumbling in his throat, a sound rare and deliberate. Jake stopped, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the street ahead, sensing the dog's shift in demeanor. Shadow's body tensed, muscles coiling beneath his glossy fur. The dog's gaze locked onto the shadowed perimeter of the neighborhood, where streetlights struggled to cut through the gathering dusk. Jake followed Shadow's line of sight, noting the subtle disturbance in the otherwise static scene. A flicker of movement just beyond the reach of the light, a whisper of something out of place. The neighborhood, so often a sanctuary, felt suddenly foreign. The serenity was fractured by the invisible presence of something darker lurking just beyond the edge of sight. Jake's mind raced through possibilities, every scenario tinted by the knowledge that safety was always precarious, especially for those who thought themselves beyond harm's reach. They continued, but the rhythm of their steps was no longer leisurely. Shadow's growls grew more frequent, low and warning, as if trying to communicate a threat Jake could not yet fully understand. The dog's senses, attuned to danger in ways that surpassed human perception, guided their cautious advance. Jake's hand slid instinctively toward the small flashlight, clipped to his belt, a habit ingrained by years of readiness. The suburban streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows that danced with the wind's gentle sway. Children's toys lay abandoned on porches, and the occasional stray newspaper rustled along the pavement, carried by a breeze that seemed colder than the season warranted. Jake's eyes darted from one shadow to the next, every instinct screaming for vigilance. As they neared the boundary of the neighborhood, the soft glow of porch lights gave way to darker stretches where houses ended and wild scrub brush began. Here, the sense of isolation deepened, the comforting hum of civilization fading into the background. Shadow's growl sharpened into a low, steady rumble as he pressed forward, his body taut and ready. Jake's pulse quickened. The protective armor of his military past slid into place, a measured calm born of countless operations in hostile environments. He adjusted his grip on Shadow's collar, ready for whatever lay ahead. The peaceful suburban evening was transforming, and Jake understood that the night held secrets that would shatter the fragile calm they had known. He glanced at Shadow, whose eyes shone with an almost human intelligence, reflecting the streetlights like twin beacons. Their bond was their strength, a silent agreement that they faced whatever darkness awaited together. The distant sirens grew louder now, weaving through the night air with a sense of urgency that matched Jake's own rising tension. No longer just a walk home, this routine had morphed into a vigil, a watchful journey at the edge of safety. Jake's mind flickered to the families tucked away behind locked doors, to the children playing in yards, now shadowed by unseen threats. His protective instincts flared, not just for those he'd never met, but for the community that had embraced him since his return. As the last light slipped beneath the horizon, the neighborhood held its breath, and Jake Reynolds moved forward with Shadow at his side. Two sentinels against the coming night. The night air, once filled with a tentative calm, now thrummed with tension as Jake and Shadow treaded closer to the neighborhood's edge. Shadow's growling grew sharper, a fierce, unrelenting warning that sliced through the stillness like a blade. Jake's fingers tightened around the dog's collar, his trained eyes searching the dim horizon for the source of unease that had set his companion on alert. A sudden rustle in the underbrush snapped both of their attention to a darkened cluster of trees lining the boundary between the manicured lawns and the wild, untamed thicket beyond. Shadow's body tensed, muscles coiling beneath his sleek fur as he emitted a low, guttural growl that echoed through the quiet night. Jake's heart pounded with a rhythm that matched the dog's warning, instincts awakening from their dormant state. Then, without warning, a gunshot shattered the silence. A sharp, violent crack that pierced the night air and sent a flock of birds startled into flight. The sound echoed through the empty streets and rolling hills like a sinister announcement. Shadow barked sharply, then yelped in pain, collapsing to the ground with a sudden, devastating thud. "No!" Jake's voice was raw with shock and urgency as he dropped to his knees beside his fallen companion. Shadow whimpered, trembling, a crimson stain blossoming on his side, where a bullet had pierced flesh. The dog's eyes met Jake's, filled with fierce determination despite the wound, a silent plea not to give up. Jake's mind raced, adrenaline surging through his veins as he tore off his jacket and pressed it firmly against the bleeding wound. His fingers moved swiftly, practiced, a blend of military precision and desperate hope. Shadow's heavy breaths came in ragged gasps, but the steadfast loyalty in his gaze never wavered. Nearby, the faint sound of movement whispered through the shadows, a struggle, muffled voices, and then the unmistakable sound of a child's frightened cry. Jake's head snapped toward the noise, his pulse quickening with dread. From the darkness, he spotted a small figure being dragged away. A young child caught in the grasp of two masked figures, their faces obscured and their intent cruel. "Hey!" Jake's voice cracked like a whip through the night. But the kidnappers were already moving swiftly, dragging the child into the dense brush beyond the reach of streetlights. The child's muffled sobs tugged at Jake's heart, igniting a fire of protective rage that surged through his veins. He scrambled to his feet, the bloodied jacket still clutched in one hand as he scanned the direction of the fleeing figures. The streetlights behind him cast long shadows, but ahead lay only darkness, a void where innocence was being stolen in the quiet hours. The realization hit him with brutal clarity. This was no random act of violence or misfortune. The attack was deliberate, targeted, a calculated strike designed to terrorize and control. The bullet that had found Shadow was a message, a warning delivered through pain and fear. The child was not just a victim, but a pawn in a darker game. Jake's military instincts surged to the forefront. His eyes narrowed as he calculated his next move, the need to act immediate and decisive. Shadow, despite the injury that threatened to steal his strength, lifted his head weakly, eyes burning with quiet defiance. The dog's loyalty was unbroken, his spirit undimmed, even as blood seeped through Jake's makeshift bandage. "Stay with me, boy," Jake murmured, voice low but resolute. His mind raced. There was no time to waste. The kidnappers were already disappearing into the thicket, their silhouettes swallowed by the night's embrace. The child's cries, faint but unmistakable, echoed in the distance, a fragile thread of hope amidst the darkness. Jake's gaze flicked to the narrow trail leading into the hills, a path that twisted through dense brush and abandoned lots. He knew this terrain well, having trained in similar environments during his deployments. Every step forward now was a step into uncertainty, but standing still was not an option. He crouched beside Shadow, pressing his hand gently to the dog's side in a silent vow to protect and heal. Then, with a grim set to his jaw, he rose and took off in pursuit, Shadow struggling to rise beside him, driven by a will far greater than pain. The night closed in around them like a shroud, the sounds of the neighborhood fading behind as the chase led them deeper into shadows. Jake's breath came hard and fast, muscles coiled and ready, senses sharpened to their peak. Every rustle, every whisper of movement was a clue, a signpost on the path to rescue. As they navigated the rough terrain, Jake's mind replayed the fragmented details he'd glimpsed, the masked faces, the forceful grip on the child, the cold efficiency of the attack. It was clear this was part of something larger, a sinister operation with far-reaching consequences. The child's safety was paramount, but unraveling the web of danger that had ensnared them all was a battle that would demand every ounce of skill and courage he possessed. Shadow's steps faltered but never ceased, his loyalty anchoring him to the mission. Jake whispered words of encouragement, their bond a steady flame against the encroaching darkness. The night was alive with unseen threats, but together they pressed onward, a silent promise forged in blood and determination. The distant sirens that had once been a background murmur now pulsed with urgency, weaving through the air like a call to action. Jake knew the hours ahead would test them beyond anything they had faced before. Yet in that moment, beneath the weight of the night and the threat that loomed, one truth remained unshaken. He and Shadow would not falter. Not now. Not ever. The uneven ground beneath Jake's boots crunched softly as he moved with calculated urgency, one hand still pressed firmly against Shadow's wounded side. The dog's breathing was shallow but steady, a fragile thread of life that Jake was determined to preserve. The fading light of the street lamps behind them was swallowed by the thickening shadows of the brush. And ahead, the trails twisted unpredictably through the hills, a maze of uncertainty where every step could mean the difference between salvation and loss. Jake's training settled over him like armor. His fingers worked swiftly, ripping a strip from his shirt to fashion a makeshift bandage. He wrapped it tightly around Shadow's injury, applying steady pressure to stem the bleeding. The dog whimpered softly but remained conscious, his dark eyes locked on Jake with unwavering trust. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink to just the two of them, man and dog, bound by a history of battles fought side by side. "We're not done yet, boy," Jake murmured, voice low and steady. "You've got to hang on." The sound of distant sirens grew louder, mingling with the restless rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. Jake's gaze flicked toward the horizon, where the faint glow of city lights battled the encroaching night. He fumbled for his phone, fingers numb but precise, dialing the local police with the urgency that the situation demanded. "This is Jake Reynolds," he said as soon as the line connected, his voice clipped but controlled. "I'm at the edge of the neighborhood near the hills. My dog's been shot and there's been a kidnapping. A child was taken by masked men heading into the brush." The dispatcher's tone was tense but professional. "We're dispatching units immediately. Can you provide a description of the suspects or direction they headed?" Jake glanced back toward the dark trail, where the faintest break in the undergrowth marked the path the kidnappers had vanished into. Two men, masked, dragging a child, heading northeast into the hills. They're moving fast, but I'm tracking their trail. Backup is en route. Stay safe and keep us updated." Jake ended the call and shifted his weight, eyes scanning the ground for any sign, footprints, broken branches, anything that could guide them. Despite the pain radiating from Shadow's side, the dog struggled to his feet, limping but resolute. The fierce loyalty that had earned him his name burned bright, a steadfast beacon that refused to dim. Together, they followed the faint trail of disturbed earth and scattered leaves, a path marked by desperation and fear. The child's muffled sobs echoed faintly through the trees, a fragile thread pulling Jake deeper into the night. Each sound sharpened his focus, every instinct honed to a razor's edge. The terrain grew rougher as they pressed on, steep inclines and tangled underbrush threatening to slow their progress. Jake's muscles burned with exertion, but he pushed through the fatigue, driven by the unyielding need to find the child and bring him to safety. Shadow's steps faltered at times, but the dog's spirit remained unbroken, eyes shining with fierce determination. Jake spoke softly, words meant to soothe and encourage. "Almost there, Shadow. Just a little further." The trail led them to a small clearing, shadowed and still. Broken twigs and fresh footprints marked the ground. The kidnappers had passed through recently. Jake's heart pounded as he scanned the area, searching for any sign of the child. Then, a faint noise, a soft whimper, barely audible, caught his attention. He crouched low, moving cautiously toward the sound, senses alert for any sign of danger. Shadow remained close, ears pricked and body tense. "Over here," Jake whispered, his voice a lifeline in the silence. Behind a tangle of bushes, they found the child, a small boy, no older than 7, trembling and wide-eyed. His clothes were torn, face streaked with dirt and tears, but he was alive. Relief flooded Jake's chest as he knelt beside the boy, speaking gently. "It's okay. You're safe now," he assured, pulling the child close. "We're getting you out of here." The boy clung to Jake, his sobs quieting as the warmth of protection settled over him. Shadow nuzzled the child's hand, offering comfort in his own quiet way. The moment was fragile, a brief reprieve in the midst of chaos, but the danger was far from over. Jake's mind raced, aware that the kidnappers might still be nearby, their intentions dark and unrelenting. He scanned the perimeter cautiously, senses stretched to the limit. "We need to move," he said softly, helping the boy to his feet. "Can you walk?" The child nodded weakly, leaning heavily on Jake as they began the trek back toward the neighborhood. Shadow limped beside them, his strength waning but his resolve ironclad. Every step was fraught with risk, but Jake's focus never wavered. As they moved through the darkened landscape, Jake's thoughts flickered to the broader implications of what they had uncovered. This was not an isolated incident. It was part of a larger, more sinister pattern that threatened the safety of the community. The urgency to act was matched only by the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Reaching the edge of the hills, the glow of streetlights welcomed them back to the world of safety and order. Jake pulled out his phone again, dialing the dispatcher with the child secure in his arms and Shadow pressing close. "We've found the boy," he reported. "We're heading back now. Shadow's injured but holding on. Units are on their way. Stay where you are and wait for assistance." Jake's grip tightened briefly on the child before easing into a reassuring hold. Shadow's breathing was labored, but the dog's eyes met Jake's with a quiet strength that spoke volumes. They had survived the night's first trial, but the path ahead remained fraught with challenges. As the distant wail of sirens grew nearer, Jake allowed himself a moment to catch his breath, the weight of the night pressing down yet tempered by the fragile hope that had been kindled. Together, they had faced the darkness, and for now, they had prevailed. The flashing red and blue lights sliced through the darkness as police cruisers arrived at the edge of the neighborhood, their engines idling with a low hum that mingled with the distant wail of sirens. Jake Reynolds stood near the curb, the small boy cradled protectively in his arms, while Shadow lay on a blanket spread across the grass, his breathing shallow but steady. The tension in the air was thick, an uneasy blend of relief and lingering danger that refused to dissipate. Detective Maria Lopez emerged from one of the vehicles, her sharp eyes quickly taking in the scene. She was a woman in her early 30s, her dark hair pulled back into a practical ponytail, and her demeanor carried the weight of countless investigations. Her gaze locked onto Jake, assessing the man who had brought the child to safety and tended to the injured dog with evident care. "Jake Reynolds?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. "I'm Detective Lopez. I understand you found the missing child and your dog was injured during the incident." Jake nodded, setting the boy down gently as paramedics approached. "Yes. It was sudden. Gunfire. Then Shadow was hit. The kidnappers took off into the hills with the child. I managed to track them by following the trail and the boy's cries." Maria's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "You did well to keep pace despite Shadow's injury. It's clear your military training played a role." Jake shrugged, his expression tight. "It's all about staying focused. But this wasn't random. Someone planned this." Maria stepped closer, lowering her voice. "We've had reports of similar kidnappings in the area. Children disappearing, ransom demands, sometimes worse. It's tied to a human trafficking ring operating under the radar." Jake's jaw clenched. That explains the masked men and the precision of the attack. They weren't just trying to scare the neighborhood. They're running something far more sinister. The detective pulled out a small notebook, flipping through pages filled with details from ongoing investigations. "We're piecing together intelligence, but the network is sophisticated, with layers designed to evade law enforcement. Your first-hand account could be crucial." Jake glanced toward Shadow, who shifted slightly on the blanket, eyes flickering with pain but alert. "Shadow's going to need veterinary care. He's a fighter, but the wound is serious." Maria nodded, signaling to the paramedics who were now tending to the boy, checking him for injuries and offering water. "We'll get him to a specialist. And you? Are you all right?" Jake forced a tired smile. "I'll manage. Right now, my priority is helping you find the others and making sure this doesn't happen again." Detective Lopez studied him for a moment longer, then extended a hand. "We could use someone with your skills and knowledge. This case is bigger than any one department, and the traffickers are dangerous. If you're willing, I'd like you to work with us, to share what you know and help map out their operations." Jake hesitated, weighing the offer. His time in the SEALs had taught him the value of teamwork and intelligence gathering, but the scars of past missions lingered. Still, the memory of the child's frightened eyes and Shadow's sacrifice solidified his resolve. "I'm in," he said firmly. "Whatever it takes." Maria's expression softened into a rare smile. "Good. We'll start by debriefing you and reviewing the evidence you collected." As officers began canvassing the neighborhood for witnesses and surveillance footage, Jake recounted the events leading up to the attack. From Shadow's sudden agitation to the gunshot that wounded his dog, to the chase through the hills, Maria took meticulous notes, her questions probing deeper into the patterns and behaviors they might exploit. "Have you noticed anything unusual in the neighborhood recently? Suspicious activity, unfamiliar faces, strange vehicles?" she asked. Jake shook his head slowly. "Nothing overt? But sometimes it's the quietest places that hide the darkest secrets. We've all been complacent, thinking we're safe here." Maria's gaze hardened. "That complacency is what they count on. But with your help, we can turn the tables." The conversation shifted toward logistics, coordinating search efforts, sharing intelligence with federal agencies, and establishing a task force dedicated to dismantling the trafficking operation. Jake's military background gave him insight into tactics and surveillance that complemented the detective's investigative experience. Outside, Shadow's condition was improving under the care of a veterinary technician who had arrived with the paramedics. The dog's breathing grew steadier, and though the wound was severe, there was hope for recovery. Jake knelt beside him, running a hand gently over the dog's head. "You're tougher than anyone I know, boy," he whispered. "We're going to get through this." As the night deepened, the neighborhood remained on edge, but a flicker of determination ignited among those sworn to protect it. Jake and Maria's tentative alliance marked the beginning of a new front in the fight against the darkness that had crept into their community. Together, they would unravel the threads of deception and violence, their combined strengths a beacon against the shadows. And as dawn approached, the fragile promise of justice glimmered on the horizon, fueled by the courage of a man, his dog, and a detective, unwilling to let evil prevail. Under the pale light of dawn, the neighborhood still held its quiet, but Jake Reynolds was already on the move. Shadow, though weakened, stood beside him, his gait uneven but determined. The dog's injury had slowed them, but the urgency to track the kidnappers had not waned. The hills beyond the familiar streets loomed ahead, a labyrinth of crumbling warehouses and tangled brush that promised little comfort and much danger. Jake adjusted the strap of his pack, the weight familiar and reassuring against his back. Every step forward was measured, deliberate, a testament to years spent navigating hostile terrain. His eyes scanned the horizon, alert for any sign of movement, any anomaly that might betray the kidnapper's presence. The trail, faint but persistent, wound through the abandoned industrial zone that skirted the city's edge. Rusted metal containers lay scattered, their surfaces scarred by time and neglect. Broken windows reflected shards of morning light, and the scent of damp concrete mixed with the distant tang of salt from the ocean breeze. Shadow's ears twitched, nose close to the ground as he picked up scents invisible to the human senses. Despite his injury, the dog pressed on, driven by a loyalty that transcended pain. Jake's heart tightened with a mixture of pride and concern. Shadow had been more than a companion through countless missions. He was family. As they moved deeper into the wasteland, Jake's mind drifted briefly to memories. Flashbacks of grueling training exercises and covert operations where every moment counted. The lessons learned in foreign deserts and rain-soaked jungles now found purpose here, in this fight to protect a child and dismantle a shadowy criminal network. The terrain grew more challenging. Piles of rubble and twisted steel forced them to navigate carefully, each footfall deliberate to avoid drawing attention. Jake's eyes caught a flicker of movement, a shadow slipping behind a warehouse wall. His breath hitched, muscles coiling as adrenaline surged. "Stay close, Shadow," he whispered, his voice low but firm. They pressed forward, moving silently through the maze of derelict buildings. Jake's senses were heightened. The faintest sound, a creak, a whisper of fabric, a footstep, could signal threat or opportunity. His training taught him to read the environment like a living map, anticipating danger and exploiting weakness. A narrow alleyway appeared ahead, cluttered with debris and half-buried crates. Jake paused, crouching to examine the ground. Footprints, fresh and distinct, led toward a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. The kidnappers had a route. Shadow growled softly, alerting Jake to a faint noise beyond the fence. A muffled voice, a child sobbing barely perceptible. The dog strained against the leash, eyes locked on the source of the sound. Jake's mind raced. This was the moment they'd been preparing for. The chance to rescue the child and strike a blow against the trafficking ring. But caution was paramount. The kidnappers were armed and desperate, and any misstep could cost lives. He scanned the perimeter, noting 2 guards patrolling near the entrance to a nearby warehouse. Their movements were methodical but relaxed, unaware of the threat closing in. Jake's fingers tightened around the grip of a tactical knife at his belt, a tool for silent neutralization if needed. Shadow's keen senses picked up a narrow gap beneath the fence, a secondary exit the kidnappers likely used to move unseen. Jake nodded, impressed by the dog's intuition. This could be their way in, avoiding direct confrontation with the guards. They slipped through the gap, muscles tense and breaths controlled, moving into the shadowed area behind the warehouse. The air here was thick with the scent of oil and rust, mingled with something faintly metallic. Jake's eyes adjusted quickly, mapping the interior through broken windows and gaps in the siding. Inside, the faint cries of the child echoed, a haunting reminder of the stakes. Jake crouched low, signaling Shadow to stay close. The dog obeyed, his injury momentarily forgotten in the face of purpose. They navigated through crates and machinery, shadows playing tricks on the eyes. Jake's military training took over, every step planned, every sound minimized. He spotted 2 more guards stationed near a metal door secured with a heavy lock. Beyond that door lay the captive child. Jake's mind worked rapidly, formulating a plan. Stealth was their ally. He would neutralize the guards silently, allowing Maria Lopez and the arriving task force to move in for the rescue. Shadow's acute senses would be crucial, alerting him to any unexpected threats. "Stay sharp," Jake whispered, reaching into his pack for a small canister of pepper spray. "We're close." The moment arrived with tense precision. Jake moved like a shadow, closing the distance to the first guard, catching him by surprise with a swift strike that rendered the man unconscious before a sound could escape. Shadow growled softly, warning as another guard approached. A quick maneuver and the second guard was subdued, the lock on the door within reach. Jake worked swiftly, picking the mechanism with practiced ease as Shadow's ears twitched, alert to approaching footsteps. The door creaked open, revealing the child huddled inside a dimly lit room. Relief flooded Jake's chest as he saw the boy's pale face and tear-streaked cheeks. The child's eyes widened with recognition and hope. "Hey there." Jake said softly, extending a hand. "You're safe now." The boy grasped Jake's hand tightly, his body trembling but alive. Shadow nuzzled the child gently, offering comfort in his own silent way. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from the corridor outside. The kidnappers had realized the intrusion. Jake moved quickly, ushering the child toward a back exit, while Shadow positioned himself between them and the approaching threat. A brief but fierce confrontation erupted. Jake's combat skills came to the fore as he engaged the kidnappers with controlled precision, disabling them with non-lethal force. Shadow barked sharply, alerting Jake to a second wave of attackers emerging from a hidden doorway. The fight was intense but brief. Jake's training and Shadow's instincts ensured their advantage. As the last kidnapper fell, distant sirens heralded the arrival of backup. Maria Lopez and a tactical team stormed in, securing the area and taking the subdued criminals into custody. Jake handed the child over to Maria, who immediately began tending to the boy's needs. Shadow, exhausted but unyielding, rested beside Jake, eyes gleaming with pride. The rescue was a success, but Jake knew this was only the beginning. The operation had exposed a fragment of a larger network, one that would require every ounce of courage, skill, and determination to dismantle. As the sun climbed higher, casting light over the abandoned warehouses and rolling hills, Jake and Shadow stood ready, partners in a battle far from over, united by loyalty and the unbreakable bond forged in the shadows of danger. The air hung heavy with tension as Jake Reynolds and Detective Maria Lopez surveyed the nondescript warehouse nestled in the shadow of rusting cranes and cracked concrete. The building's corrugated metal walls, stained with years of neglect, concealed a grim secret. Inside, a child remained captive, surrounded by armed men whose ruthless purpose threatened to extinguish any hope of rescue. Jake crouched behind a stack of wooden pallets, eyes sharp and calculating. Shadow rested beside him, alert despite his lingering injury, ears swiveling toward every distant sound. The dog's acute senses had been invaluable throughout the investigation, their bond a silent language that required no words. Tonight, that bond would be tested as they prepared to confront the darkness lurking within these walls. Maria spoke softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "We have intel that the child is being held on the upper floor. Armed guards patrol the ground-level entrances, and there may be lookouts outside." Jake nodded, his mind already mapping the approach. "We'll need a way in that avoids the main entrances. Shadow's nose might pick up a secondary route." The dog sniffed the air and then tugged gently on his leash, leading Jake toward a narrow gap between the warehouse and a dilapidated loading dock. The space was barely wide enough to slip through, but it offered a vantage point. A rusted fire escape winding its way to a side door on the second floor. "This could be our entry," Jake said, eyes scanning the path. "If we move fast and quiet, we can bypass the guards and get to the child before they realize." Maria checked her communications. "Tactical teams are in position around the perimeter, ready to move once we confirm the child's safety." Jake tightened his grip on Shadow's collar. "Let's move." They slipped through the narrow passage, the sound of their footsteps muffled by years of rust and debris. The fire escape groaned softly under their weight as they ascended, each rung a test of nerve and balance. Shadow climbed with surprising agility, though Jake remained vigilant, ready to catch the dog if he faltered. Reaching the second-floor door, Jake peered inside. A dimly lit corridor stretched ahead, punctuated by the low murmur of voices and the occasional clink of weapons being checked. The kidnappers were alert but unaware of the impending storm. Jake signaled Maria, who nodded and took point, her hand resting lightly on the grip of her service pistol. Together, They moved forward, shadows among shadows. As they neared the child's location, Shadow's ears pricked, and he let out a low growl. Jake froze, eyes narrowing. Ahead, 2 guards stood near a stairwell, their conversation low, but laced with menace. Maria whispered, "We need to take them quietly. No alarms." Jake reached for a compact tactical knife, its blade gleaming faintly in the dim light. With practiced precision, he edged closer, timing his movements carefully. Shadow flanked the guards, a silent sentinel ready to strike if needed. The first guard never saw it coming. Jake's swift strike rendered him unconscious before a sound could escape. The second guard spun toward the sudden noise, but Shadow lunged, teeth bared in a warning snap that stopped the man cold. Maria moved quickly, subduing him with a stun gun before he could raise an alarm. With the path clear, Jake and Maria slipped past the guards, moving deeper into the warehouse. The corridor opened into a large storage room, where crates and machinery cast long shadows. At the far end, a small figure huddled in the corner, a child, eyes wide with fear and hope. Jake's voice was gentle. "Hey there, we're here to get you out." The child looked up, trembling but clinging to the promise of rescue. Shadow approached quietly, nuzzling the child's hand, offering comfort through warmth and presence. Suddenly, the distant sound of footsteps echoed through the corridor. Jake's eyes darted toward the entrance as more kidnappers appeared, alerted by the earlier scuffle. The air thickened with danger. Maria's voice was sharp. "We need to move now." Jake scooped up the child, signaling Shadow to stay close. They retraced their steps, but the path was no longer clear. The kidnappers blocked the stairwell, weapons raised, faces twisted with rage. A tense standoff erupted. Jake's military training took command, his movements fluid and precise as he engaged the kidnappers, disarming and disabling with calculated efficiency. Maria covered their escape, firing warning shots that forced the attackers to retreat. Shadow, despite his injury, sprang into action, barking fiercely and snapping at anyone who dared approach. His presence was a force multiplier, buying Jake and Maria precious seconds to navigate the chaos. They reached the stairwell, descending rapidly as reinforcements arrived, tactical officers flooding the area with coordinated precision. The kidnappers scattered, some attempting to flee while others surrendered under overwhelming firepower. Jake handed the child to Maria, who immediately began comforting the frightened boy. Shadow collapsed against Jake's leg, exhausted but resolute. Outside, the night air was cool and crisp, carrying the distant sounds of sirens and radio chatter. The warehouse, once a fortress of fear, was now a scene of victory, a testament to teamwork, courage, and the unyielding bond between man and dog. As officers secured the perimeter and began questioning detainees, Jake allowed himself a moment to breathe. His gaze met Maria's, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, a shared resolve to see this mission through to the end. The operation had succeeded in rescuing the child, but Jake knew the fight was far from over. The traffickers' network was vast, their reach insidious. Yet tonight had proven that with determination, strategy, and unwavering loyalty, even the darkest shadows could be pierced. Shadow stirred beside him, lifting his head and meeting Jake's eyes with a fierce, unspoken promise. Together, they would continue the hunt, partners bound by trust, ready to face whatever dangers lay ahead. The warehouse's dim corridors echoed with hurried footsteps and whispered commands as Jake Reynolds moved with tactical precision, the rescued child cradled protectively in his arms. Maria Lopez covered their rear, her keen eyes scanning every shadow for threats, while Shadow, though visibly weakened, remained a vigilant guardian at Jake's side. The atmosphere was thick with urgency. The kidnappers were regrouping, and time was slipping through their fingers. Jake's mind raced, replaying the moments that had brought them here. The silent takedowns of the guards, the tense rescue, and now the frantic effort to escape a tightening noose. The child's small hands gripped his jacket, eyes wide but trusting, a fragile beacon amid the chaos. Suddenly, a sharp noise, a metallic clang against concrete, broke the tension. From the shadows, a kidnapper lunged, desperate and wild-eyed, wielding a makeshift weapon. Jake reacted instantly, sidestepping and delivering a precise blow that sent the attacker sprawling. His movements were fluid, honed by years of combat training, a dance of survival and protection. Shadow growled, teeth bared, as another assailant emerged from a side passage, weapon raised. Despite the dog's injury, his instincts remained razor-sharp. He lunged, knocking the attacker off balance, buying Jake precious seconds to subdue the threat with a swift strike. Maria fired a warning shot into the air, her voice commanding, "Drop your weapons. This ends now." The kidnappers hesitated, caught between fury and fear. Some surrendered, hands raised. Others sought to flee deeper into the labyrinthine warehouse. The tension snapped as a coordinated response surged forward, tactical officers streaming in, weapons trained, voices steady and authoritative. Jake moved toward the child, securing him closer as they navigated the maze of crates and shadows. The rescued boy's sobs began to quiet, his trust in Jake and Maria palpable despite the terror he had endured. But the fight was far from over. From behind a stack of pallets, a figure darted, a key antagonist desperate to escape capture and maintain the trafficking operation's grip. Jake's eyes locked onto the man, recognizing the cold calculation in his movements. This was no petty criminal. This was a linchpin in a network of exploitation and violence. "Stop," Jake commanded. But the man bolted, weaving through obstacles with practiced agility. Shadow barked, lunging after the fleeing figure despite the pain that radiated from his wounded side. Jake followed, muscles burning, heart pounding with the urgency of the chase. The warehouse gave way to an open yard, littered with debris and rusting machinery. The antagonist sprinted toward a waiting vehicle, a battered van with darkened windows, engine idling like a predator poised to escape. Jake closed the distance, shouting for backup as he moved. The man reached the van, yanked the door open, and shoved the driver aside, attempting to start the engine. But before he could, Shadow leapt, teeth sinking into the man's arm with fierce determination. A guttural growl rose from the dog, pain mixing with resolve as the man struggled to shake him off. Jake seized the moment, tackling the antagonist to the ground with a force born of desperation and justice. The two grappled, a brutal exchange of wills beneath the cold gaze of the moon. The man fought viciously, but Jake's training and resolve prevailed. With a final, decisive maneuver, he secured the man's wrists behind his back, snapping handcuffs around them as backup officers arrived to provide cover. Shadow collapsed beside Jake, panting heavily, blood staining his fur. Jake knelt, pressing a hand gently to the dog's side, voice thick with emotion. "You did it, boy. You stopped him." Paramedics rushed forward, tending to Shadow's wound as officers rounded up the remaining kidnappers. The rescued child was wrapped in a blanket, comforted by Maria as she relayed details to waiting emergency personnel. The warehouse compound, once a fortress of fear, was now a scene of law enforcement triumph, the culmination of a perilous hunt that had tested every ounce of courage and skill. Jake stood, exhaustion threatening to pull him down, but a fierce satisfaction burned within. They had saved a life tonight. They had struck a blow against darkness. Yet, As the night air chilled his skin, Jake knew this victory was but a single battle in a larger war. The escaped antagonist remained at large, a shadow looming over the fragile peace restored. But with Shadow at his side and allies like Maria in the fight, Jake was ready to face whatever came next. Undaunted, unyielding, and driven by an unbreakable bond forged in the fires of survival and hope. The late morning sun filtered gently through the curtains of the veterinary clinic, casting warm patches of light over Shadow's resting form. The sleek black dog lay on a cushioned examination table, his dark eyes half closed but flickering with alertness whenever Jake Reynolds entered the room. The steady beep of medical monitors punctuated the quiet, a testament to the fragile balance between life and recovery. Jake sat beside Shadow, his hand resting lightly on the dog's side, feeling the slow, steady rise and fall of each breath. The wound, though deep and painful, was healing under the attentive care of the veterinary team. Shadow's resilience was nothing short of remarkable, an unspoken testament to the bond they shared. Outside the clinic, a small crowd had gathered near the neighborhood's community center, where the rescued child was being reunited with his family. Tears flowed freely as the boy's mother embraced him tightly, her sobs a mixture of relief and gratitude that echoed through the streets. The ordeal had left its mark on everyone involved. But moments like this rekindled hope and underscored the importance of their fight. Detective Maria Lopez stood nearby, her posture relaxed but vigilant as she spoke with local reporters. Her voice carried the weight of experience and the promise of continued vigilance. This is a victory for the community, but it's only the beginning. We are committed to dismantling the trafficking network responsible and ensuring no family endures such pain again. Jake approached Maria, the gratitude in his eyes reflecting the long hours and hard work behind the scenes. "The boy's safe, and Shadow's on the mend," he said quietly. "But we both know the fight isn't over." Maria nodded. "We have leads on the escapee and connections that reach beyond this neighborhood. Your expertise has been invaluable." They spoke briefly about coordinating resources, sharing information with federal agencies, and expanding the task force they had formed. Jake's military background complemented Maria's investigative skills, creating a partnership built on trust and determination. Back at the clinic, the veterinarian approached Jake with a reassuring smile. "Shadow's prognosis is good. With rest and continued care, he should make a full recovery. He's a fighter, and clearly, he has a remarkable bond with you." Jake's eyes softened. "He's more than a dog. He's family." As the day stretched on, Jake reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the sudden attack on the neighborhood to the tense rescue mission, and now the slow, steady path toward healing. The scars left by violence and fear would not disappear overnight, but the community's resilience shone through. Neighbors gathered in small groups, sharing stories, offering support, and renewing their commitment to vigilance. The trauma had forged a new sense of solidarity, a collective determination to protect their own. Jake found himself drawn to the park near his home, where children played cautiously but with newfound freedom. He watched Shadow, now walking steadily at his side, tail wagging gently despite the lingering stiffness. The dog's recovery mirrored the fragile hope blossoming in the neighborhood. Maria joined him, handing over a folder filled with updated case files and surveillance reports. "We've identified several suspects connected to the trafficking ring," she said. "With continued pressure, we can bring them down." Jake nodded, resolve hardening. "We'll keep at it. For the kids, for the families." The sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over the streets as Jake and Maria stood watching the neighborhood come alive with cautious optimism. Shadow rested his head against Jake's leg, a silent reminder of the battles fought and the victories yet to come. In that moment, the promise of healing and justice felt tangible, a beacon guiding them forward through the darkness. Together, they would fight to ensure that safety, hope, and resilience endured, no matter the cost. The courtroom buzzed with a quiet intensity as the final pieces of the trafficking investigation fell into place. Months of sleepless nights, relentless pursuit, and painstaking evidence gathering had culminated in this moment. The human trafficking ring that had terrorized the neighborhood was unraveling, its leaders facing the weight of justice for the first time. Jake Reynolds sat near the back, Shadow resting quietly at his feet, now fully recovered, but still the ever-watchful companion. Detective Maria Lopez was seated beside him, their shared journey evident in the tired but resolute lines on their faces. The courtroom was filled with families, victims, and community members, each bearing witness to a hard-fought victory against a dark underworld. As the judge read the verdicts, the gravity of the moment settled over the room. Guilty on all counts, the traffickers would spend years behind bars, their reign of fear dismantled through the combined efforts of law enforcement and the community's resilience. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements, cameras flashing as Jake and Maria stepped forward. Jake's voice was steady as he addressed the crowd. This is more than a personal victory. It's a stand for every family that refused to be silenced. The cost of violence is high, but together, we've shown that courage and unity can prevail. Maria added, "Our work continues. This ring was just one thread in a larger fabric of crime that we're committed to unraveling. But today, we celebrate justice served." The neighborhood, once shadowed by fear, began to heal visibly. Streets buzzed with renewed life. Children playing freely, neighbors sharing smiles, and a community vigilant but hopeful. The scars left by trauma remained, but so did the strength born from survival. Jake often found himself walking these streets with Shadow, their presence a symbol of protection and hope. Neighbors greeted them warmly, stories of gratitude exchanged like the threads of a tapestry woven tighter by adversity. The boy they had rescued had returned to school, his laughter a bright melody piercing the once heavy silence. At community meetings, Jake spoke candidly about the costs of violence and the importance of vigilance. His military experience lent weight to his words, but it was his genuine compassion that resonated most deeply. "We can't afford complacency," he reminded the gathered crowd. "Safety is a shared responsibility. Every watchful eye, every voice raised against injustice makes a difference." Maria coordinated ongoing efforts, working closely with federal agencies to track down remaining suspects linked to human trafficking networks. Their partnership, forged in crisis, grew stronger, a testament to the power of collaboration. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jake and Shadow paused atop a small hill overlooking the neighborhood. The fading light bathed the streets in a golden glow, a quiet reminder of both the battles fought and the peace reclaimed. Shadow nudged Jake's hand with his nose, a simple gesture laden with meaning, the unspoken bond between man and dog, protector and companion. Jake's gaze swept across the neighborhood, a mix of pride and solemnity in his eyes. The journey had changed them all, leaving scars but also forging resilience. The promise of safety was fragile but fiercely defended. As the stars began to twinkle overhead, Jake whispered, "We've come a long way, boy. But the fight isn't over. Not yet." Shadow's tail thumped softly against the ground, an echo of unwavering loyalty. Together, they stood sentinel over a neighborhood reborn, guardians of a hard-won peace and a future shaped by hope and vigilance. The late afternoon sun cast a warm, amber glow over the quiet streets of the neighborhood, its rays filtering through the canopy of trees lining the sidewalks. Jake Reynolds stood on the porch of his modest home, Shadow sitting loyally at his feet, both silhouettes outlined against the fading light. The air was thick with the scent of blooming flowers and freshly mowed grass, a peaceful contrast to the turbulence that had once gripped this place. Jake's gaze swept across the familiar streets, now alive with children's laughter and neighbors sharing smiles. The community had healed, scars still present, but softened by time and collective resilience. It was a new beginning, born out of hardship, a testament to the strength that could emerge from darkness. He turned as footsteps approached, and Detective Maria Lopez stepped onto the porch, her expression a blend of warmth and quiet determination. The partnership forged through trials had endured, evolving into a deep camaraderie rooted in shared purpose. "You're really staying," she said, a hint of surprise in her tone. Jake smiled, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, this is home now. After everything, I want to give back. Help keep this place safe, for real this time." Maria nodded approvingly. "We could use someone like you on the community safety initiative I'm leading. Your experience, your insight, it makes a difference." "I'm in," Jake replied without hesitation. The weight of past battles was balanced by the promise of future service, a new mission shaped by hope rather than conflict. Shadow wagged his tail, sensing the shift in atmosphere, his eyes bright despite the calm. The dog had recovered fully, his spirit as steadfast as ever, ready to continue the work they had begun together. As the evening deepened, neighbors gathered in small groups, their conversations filled with stories of recovery and plans for a safer future. Jake and Maria moved among them, offering support, listening, and fostering a renewed sense of community vigilance. Later, as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Jake and Shadow found themselves atop a gentle hill overlooking the neighborhood. The city skyline shimmered in the distance, a reminder of the world beyond, but also the sanctuary they had reclaimed. Maria stood beside them, the three figures silhouetted against the fading light. For a moment, words were unnecessary, a shared understanding passing between them. The battles fought, the lives saved, and the bonds forged were etched into their beings. Finally, Jake broke the silence. "We've come a long way, but there's always more to do. Together, we'll keep watching, keep fighting for those who can't." Maria smiled, her eyes reflecting the stars emerging overhead. "And we'll do it side by side." Shadow let out a soft bark, a joyful sound that echoed into the night, a living symbol of loyalty and hope. As they stood there, the neighborhood stretched out before them, safe, vibrant, and alive, a testament to the power of resilience and the promise of new beginnings. The past remained a shadow, but it no longer defined them. With the stars as their witness, Jake, Maria, and Shadow embraced the future, a future shaped by courage, unity, and the unbreakable bond between humans and their canine companions.